The Christmas decorations were still hanging in the arrivals hall of Ninoy Aquino International Airport in Manila when airport security made a discovery that would shock the entire Philippines. It was December 27, 2023, 2 days after Christmas, and a cleaning crew had noticed a terrible smell coming from one of the long-term parking garage levels. When security investigated, they found a body in the trunk of a rented Toyota Camry. The man had been dead for at least 36 hours. He'd been stabbed 17 times. His wallet was missing, but his passport, stuffed under the spare tire, identified him as 34-year-old Garrett Mitchell from Tulsa, Oklahoma, thousands of miles from home, dead during Christmas. And the investigation into how he ended up in that trunk would reveal secrets that would destroy a family back in America. Garrett Allen Mitchell was born in 1989 in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a quiet suburb just outside Tulsa. His childhood was ordinary in the best way possible. Little league baseball, church on Sundays, summers spent at his grandparents' ranch in rural Oklahoma learning to ride horses and fix tractors. His parents, Tom and Linda Mitchell, owned a small construction company, and Garrett grew up understanding the value of hard work and family loyalty. He was the middle child between two sisters, and his family described him as the peacemaker, the one who always tried to make everyone happy, sometimes to his own detriment. Garrett wasn't particularly ambitious, but he was steady and reliable. After high school, he went to community college for 2 years, got his certification in HVAC repair, and started working for a heating and cooling company in Tulsa. By his mid-20s, he was making decent money, around $65,000 a year, and had built a reputation as someone who showed up on time, did quality work, and treated customers with respect. He wasn't getting rich, but he was comfortable. And in 2018, when he was 29, he met someone who would change everything. Her name was Becca Sullivan. She was 27, a dental hygienist working at a practice in Tulsa, with strawberry blonde hair and a laugh that Garrett said made him feel like everything was going to be okay. They met at a friend's backyard barbecue, started talking about nothing important. Favorite movies, worst jobs they'd ever had, whether dogs or cats were better, and by the end of the night, Garrett knew he wanted to see her again. They dated for almost a year, and by everyone's account, they were genuinely happy. Garrett's family loved Becca. She was warm, funny, good with Garrett's nieces and nephews. Becca's family loved Garrett. He was kind, hardworking, clearly devoted to their daughter. They got engaged in December 2018, married in a small ceremony in May 2019, and by August 2020 Becca was pregnant. Their daughter, Hadley Grace Mitchell, was born in April 2021, and Garrett became the kind of father who cried when he held her for the first time. He was obsessed with that little girl, came home from work every day and immediately scooped her up, took 1,000 photos, called his mother every other day with updates about Hadley's milestones. When Hadley said, "Dada," for the first time at 8 months old, Garrett recorded it and played it for everyone he knew. By all appearances, Garrett Mitchell had built a good life. A wife, a daughter, a stable job, a modest but comfortable home in a safe neighborhood. His parents looked at him and felt proud. This was what they'd raised him to be, a good man, a good husband, a good father. By 2022, 3 years into marriage and adjusting to life with a toddler, Garrett started feeling something he couldn't name. Not unhappiness exactly, but a restlessness. A sense that his life had become predictable in a way that felt suffocating. Becca was exhausted all the time from working full-time and managing most of Hadley's care. Garrett was working long hours, including weekends and emergency calls. They barely talked anymore beyond logistics. Who's picking up Hadley from daycare? Did you pay the electric bill? Can you grab milk on the way home? They hadn't been on a date in months. The spark that had brought them together felt buried under the routine of survival. Garrett didn't talk to Becca about how he was feeling. Instead, he started looking for something he couldn't even articulate. In September 2022, he made a decision that seemed small at the time but would change everything. He downloaded something to his phone. Something he told himself was harmless. Just curiosity. Just browsing. Nothing serious. But within a week, he'd connected with someone. And within a month, that someone had become the center of his world in a way that terrified and excited him in equal measure. Her name was Estrella. She was beautiful, attentive, interested in everything about him. She made him feel things he hadn't felt in years. Desired, interesting, alive. They started talking constantly. Messages at work. Phone calls late at night when Becca was asleep. Video chats that made Garrett's heart race. She asked about his day, his dreams, what made him happy. She never complained, never made demands, never asked difficult questions. She just made him feel good. By October 2022, Garrett had crossed a line he never thought he'd cross. He drove somewhere he shouldn't have gone, told Becca a lie he'd never told before, and spent time with someone in a way that shattered every promise he'd made on his wedding day. And he couldn't stop, even though the guilt was eating him alive. Even though he knew what he was doing was wrong. He was addicted to the way this other life made him feel. Like he was someone different. Someone more exciting than the HVAC repairman from Tulsa with a mortgage and a diaper bag in his truck. Over the next year, Garrett lived two lives. The one his family saw, husband, father, hardworking employee. And the one nobody knew about. The secret phone calls. The money he started sending. The elaborate lies about where he was and what he was doing. Every time he kissed Hadley goodnight, he felt sick with shame. Every time he looked at Becca, he felt the weight of his betrayal. But he couldn't stop. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments because what happened next shows how secrets have a way of becoming deadly. In August 2023, something changed. Estrella and Garrett had been talking for almost a year. She told him she was leaving. Moving away. Going back to where she came from. Family emergency. Garrett was devastated. The thought of losing this escape, this fantasy he'd built, felt unbearable. And that's when she suggested something that seemed insane but also thrilling. Come visit me, she said. Just for a week. We deserve real time together. Garrett knew it was crazy. He had responsibilities. A family. But she kept pushing, kept telling him how much she needed him, how they'd never have this chance again. And slowly, Garrett started convincing himself it was possible. He'd worked hard for years. Didn't he deserve 1 week? Just 1 week of something that felt like freedom? By November 2023, Garrett had made a decision. He would go. He'd tell Becca it was something else, something believable. And he'd have 1 week of whatever this was before coming back to his real life. The lie he told Becca in mid-November was elaborate and specific. A work opportunity. Emergency job overseas. A connection through a friend of a friend. Too good to pass up. The dates would be December 22nd through December 29th, which meant he'd miss Christmas with his family. But he'd be back before New Year's. Becca was furious. You're going to miss Hadley's Christmas? Her first real Christmas where she understands what's happening. She stared at her husband, this man she thought she knew, and felt something cold settle in her stomach. Something was wrong. She couldn't prove it, but she knew. Garrett felt terrible, but he'd already made up his mind. I don't have a choice. This could change things for us financially. It's for our future. Becca didn't believe him. Not completely. But what could she say? He's her husband. Garrett's mother, Linda, was even more upset when Garrett told his family about the trip. What kind of father misses Christmas with his 2-year-old daughter? She demanded. Garrett gave her the same excuses, but Linda looked at her son and saw something she didn't recognize. Something was deeply wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what. On December 22, 2023, Garrett kissed Hadley goodbye. The little girl was crying, not understanding why Daddy was leaving. He hugged Becca, who stood stiff and angry in his arms. And he drove to the airport, his stomach churning with guilt and anticipation. As the plane took off, Garrett looked out the window at Oklahoma disappearing below him, and he had a moment of clarity that almost made him tell the flight attendant to let him off. What was he doing? But the moment passed, and the plane carried him toward something he couldn't yet imagine. He landed in Manila on December 23rd, exhausted from the 15-hour flight and the layover. Everything felt surreal. The tropical heat, the chaotic airport, the unfamiliar language swirling around him. He waited for the person he'd come to see, checking his phone obsessively. Finally, a message, running late, family issues, take a taxi to this address. I'll meet you there. Garrett took a taxi to a hotel in Makati, Manila's financial district. The driver tried to make conversation, asking why Garrett was visiting, but Garrett just mumbled something about tourism and stared out the window. Manila was overwhelming. Traffic, pollution, density unlike anything in Oklahoma. He felt very far from home. He checked into the hotel, showered, and waited. When the knock came on his door around 8 p.m., Garrett's heart was racing. He opened the door and for a moment, everything felt worth it. She was real. She was here. She looked exactly like her photos, beautiful, smiling, reaching for him. They spent that first night talking, laughing, and Garrett felt a rush of relief. This was real. He hadn't been deceived. The guilt was still there, gnawing at him, but he pushed it down. He'd deal with that when he got home. But on Christmas Eve, things started feeling strange. She kept stepping away to take phone calls, speaking in rapid Tagalog that Garrett couldn't understand. When he asked who she was talking to, she'd wave it off. Family drama, nothing important. Garrett noticed she seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly, looking at him sometimes in a way that made him uncomfortable. Like she was calculating something. On Christmas morning, she suggested they drive out of the city. Somewhere more private, where we can really be alone. She said she'd borrowed a car from a friend, a Toyota Camry. They'd drive to a resort area a few hours outside Manila. Garrett hesitated. Something felt off. But he'd come all this way. He'd lied to everyone he loved. He couldn't back out now. They got in the car and started driving. Garrett tried to make conversation, but she seemed focused on the road, less warm than she'd been the night before. They drove for over an hour, the city giving way to rural areas, the roads becoming narrower and more isolated. Garrett's unease grew with every mile. Finally, she pulled off onto a dirt road that led to what looked like an abandoned property. Buildings in disrepair, overgrown vegetation, no other cars or people anywhere. Garrett's stomach dropped. What is this place? She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My friend's family owns this. It's closed for renovations. We can stay here for free. Complete privacy. Garrett looked around at the deserted buildings and felt fear crawl up his spine. I don't think this is a good idea. Let's go back to the city. She turned off the engine. Don't you trust me? Before Garrett could answer, he heard something. Footsteps. Multiple people. He turned and saw figures emerging from the buildings. 3 men moving toward the car with purpose. Garrett's blood turned to ice. What's happening? He asked, his voice shaking. But she was already getting out of the car, walking toward the men, speaking to them in Tagalog. Garrett tried to open his door, tried to run, but hands grabbed him, yanked him out of the car. He tried to fight, tried to scream, but a fist connected with his face, stunning him, dropping him to the ground. They dragged him into one of the buildings. Everything happened so fast. Pain, terror, voices shouting in a language he didn't understand. They took his phone, his wallet, demanded PIN numbers for his cards. Garrett, bleeding and terrified, gave them everything. He begged them not to hurt him. He said he had a daughter. He said he'd give them anything they wanted. But it didn't matter. Because this had never been about money. Or maybe it had been, and when they realized he didn't have as much as they'd hoped, it became about something else. About leaving no witnesses. About finishing what they'd started. The last thing Garrett Mitchell thought about as pain exploded through his body again and again was Hadley's face. The way she'd cried when he left. The way she'd said "Dada" and reached for him. And he realized in those final horrifying moments that he would never see her again. That he'd thrown away everything, his wife, his daughter, his life, for a lie. For a fantasy that had led him here, to this abandoned building in a country thousands of miles from home, dying alone while people who didn't care about him at all decided his life was worth less than whatever they could take from his bank account. Garrett Mitchell died on Christmas Day 2023. Stabbed 17 times. Left to bleed out on a dirty floor. And when it was over, the people who killed him loaded his body into the trunk of the Camry, drove back to Manila, and left the car in the airport parking garage before disappearing into the city. Back in Oklahoma, Becca spent Christmas trying to reach Garrett. His phone went straight to voicemail. She texted, nothing. She called the hotel he'd claimed he was staying at for work. They had no reservation under his name. By December 26th, Becca knew something was horribly wrong. She called Garrett's employer, demanding to know about the overseas project. The manager paused, confused. What project? Garrett took personal vacation days. He said it was a family emergency. The world tilted under Becca's feet. He'd lied. About everything. But why? Where was he? She called the U.S. Embassy in Manila on December 27th, frantic, barely able to speak through her panic. My husband is in the Philippines and I can't reach him and I think something's wrong. The person on the other end of the line asked for Garrett's name. There was a long pause. Then, "Ma'am, I need you to sit down. I have some information about your husband." And that's how Becca learned that Garrett was dead. Murdered. Found in an airport parking garage. And the investigation that followed would reveal that her husband hadn't been in Manila for work. He'd been there to meet someone. A woman. Someone he'd been involved with for over a year. Becca's grief turned to rage, turned to something beyond comprehension. Her husband had abandoned her and their daughter at Christmas to be with another woman. And that decision had gotten him killed. She didn't know which betrayal hurt more, the affair or the fact that he died because of it, leaving her to explain to their 2-year-old daughter why Daddy wasn't coming home. The FBI got involved because an American citizen had been murdered abroad. They worked with Philippine National Police to investigate. What they uncovered was devastating. Garrett had been sending money to someone for over a year. Thousands of dollars. His phone records showed constant communication with a number registered in Dallas, Texas, but that had recently switched to a Philippine number. Security footage from the Manila airport showed a woman meeting Garrett when he arrived. But when investigators tried to trace the woman, they hit dead ends. The name she'd used wasn't real. The apartment in Dallas she'd claimed to live in was a short-term rental. The Philippine phone number was a burner. She'd disappeared completely. And the men who'd killed Garrett? 2 were eventually caught, low-level criminals from Manila who admitted they'd been hired to rob an American. But when the job went wrong, things escalated. They claimed a woman had set it up, paid them, and vanished. They didn't know her real name. The third man and the woman were never found. Garrett's body was flown back to Oklahoma in early January 2024. The funeral was surreal. Everyone knew the truth by then, that Garrett had died while cheating on his wife. Some people didn't know how to mourn him. Others were angry at him even in death. Becca sat through the service holding Hadley, who kept asking loudly, "Where's Daddy? When is Daddy coming home?" And Becca didn't have an answer that a 2-year-old could understand. Linda, Garrett's mother, could barely look at the casket. Her son had thrown away his life for a lie, had abandoned his family for a fantasy, and it had killed him. Tom, Garrett's father, stood silent and broken, unable to reconcile the son he'd raised with the man who'd made these choices. In the months that followed, more pieces fell into place. Investigators believed the woman Garrett had been involved with was part of an organized crime network targeting vulnerable men through online relationships. She'd likely done this before, would likely do it again. But without knowing her real identity, there was nothing they could do. Becca filed for posthumous divorce to protect herself and Hadley from Garrett's debts. She's raising their daughter alone now, working full-time, relying on family. Hadley is 4 now and barely remembers her father. Sometimes she'll see a photo and say, "That's Daddy," but the memory is fading. One day Becca will have to tell her daughter the full truth. She dreads that conversation. The case became a warning across America, about online relationships, about romance scams, about the dangers of secrets. But warnings don't bring Garrett back. They don't undo the choices he made. They don't heal the family he destroyed. Before we end, I want to hear from you. Could anything have prevented this tragedy? What warning signs should people watch for in relationships? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know what case you'd like me to cover next. Garrett Mitchell was 34 years old. He had a wife who loved him, a daughter who needed him, parents who were proud of him. He had a life that many people would have been grateful for. But he wanted something else. Something exciting. Something that made him feel different. And that desire led him to Manila, to an abandoned building, to a death so senseless and avoidable that it almost doesn't feel real. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. Every day we tell stories of survival, justice, and the strength of people who refuse to be victims. This has been Secret Witness, True Crime Stories, where we uncover hidden truths and honor those who refuse to become victims.